Greetings. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for panel number 9, Advancing Naval Capabilities, Partnerships, Design Excellence, and Case Studies. A special thank you to the Naval Postgraduate School for inviting me to be the panel chair today. I am Rear Admiral Tom Anderson, Program Executive Officer for Ships, and I have the awesome job of being the Navy's lead surface ship acquirer, responsible for the design, construction, and ultimately delivery of ships to our fleet. Before I introduce our presenters, I want to give you some insight into the work we do in PEO ships. I also want to give you insight into how we are performing and what we are looking to do differently in the future to deliver at the pace the Navy needs. I think you will find the presentations today line up exceptionally well with the options we are pursuing to improve outcomes in shipbuilding. Within PEO ships, we have 9 shipbuilding program offices, which acquire large surface combatants, think DDGs, amphibious platforms, LHAs, LPDs, and connectors, auxiliary platforms, things like fleet oilers, salvage vessels, and submarine tenders, special mission ships like Tiagos, and sea lift ships in concert with our MARAD partners. Last year, PEO ships delivered 7 ships across 6 different ship classes. It is the most delivered in the history of the command. We also awarded a significant number of long-term contracts over the last couple of years. The DDG 51 multi-year procurement, the Amphib multi-ship procurement, and the TAO block buy, to name a few, providing stability to our shipbuilders and providing us solid pricing. And while we celebrate all those accomplishments, we know the Navy needs more out of us in the way of throughput. Let me paint the picture for you. We have a portfolio that's increasing in the number of classes of ships that we acquire, and at the same time increasing in the overall quantity of ships that we acquire. That's a challenge with an already significant backlog on contract and a shipbuilding industrial base that is struggling to attract and retain talent. This is happening at the same time that our partners in the submarine acquisition field are working to expand to 3 submarines per year, that being 2 Virginia-class and 1 Columbia-class submarine, which is by itself a daunting task. At the same time, our premier peer competitor, China, is leveraging a massive commercial shipbuilding ecosystem to deliver Navy ships at a pace that we cannot match today. So the big question is, how do we increase the number of ships in our operational Navy more quickly? In my humble opinion, there are 2 major methods to be pursued. 1, we must decrease the time it takes to acquire a ship. And I'll break that down into 2 different phases. 1, we must shorten the design cycle. And 2, we must shorten the construction cycle. In addition to decreasing the time it takes to acquire a ship, we also must increase the number of shipbuilders, the number of shipyards that are building ships for our U.S. Navy. PEO ships is acting on each of these lines of effort, and as luck would have it, the papers being talked about today focus on those very topics. It is important, and I look forward to a robust discussion on these important matters. Now on to the format for today's presentations. Our 3 presenters will speak in the order I introduced them, and they will have up to 15 minutes to make their presentations. There will be time for QA after the presentations are complete, and we're all looking forward to the dialogue. Our first presenter is Henry Carroll, Research Associate, Defense Industrial Initiatives Group, Center for Strategic International Studies. His focus areas include the defense industrial base, naval policy, and assessing foreign military industrial capacity. Prior to joining CSIS, he worked as an intern in the Defense and International Practices of Brownstein and as a defense-focused legislative intern for Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Henry holds a BA in history with a concentration in War and Society from Yale University. His topic today will be exploring possible pathways for U.S. shipbuilding cooperation with allies and partners. Our second presenter is Sean Merrill, Senior Analyst, Contracting and National Security Acquisitions, U.S. Government Accountability Office, specializing in U.S. weapons system acquisition. He has worked in this area for 20 years, with a primary focus on naval shipbuilding issues for the past decade. His Navy-related work has included reports and recommendations related to destroyer and frigate programs, as well as a broader view for the Navy ship design, testing, and shipbuilding. His presentation today will be on the topic of increased Navy use of leading design practices that could improve timelines for ship deliveries. Our final presenter, Professor Bob Mortlock, NPS-owned Associate Chair of Acquisition Management. He also serves in a variety of other roles, including Principal Investigator of the Acquisition Research Program. Bob is a retired Army colonel with over 15 years of acquisition professional experience in a variety of DoD programs. His presentation will focus on USMC landing craft case study. I'm excited to hear from each of you on these important topics. Henry, I will now turn it over for you to begin the presentations.
Hi, everyone. My name is Henry Carroll, and I'm a research associate with the Defense Industrial Initiatives Group here at CSIS. This presentation is going to be part of a broader project working on identifying and evaluating possible pathways for U.S. shipbuilding cooperation with its allies and partners. The study team includes Dr. Cynthia Cook, Seamus Daniels, and Katie Buda. On the next slide, we see that the nature of the threat facing the U.S. in the maritime domain has changed. The past 2 decades have seen rapid growth in China's shipbuilding capabilities. China is now the world's largest shipbuilder by a significant margin. It has a shipbuilding capacity that is more than 230 times that of the United States. And according to U.S. Navy estimates, a single Chinese shipyard has more capacity than all U.S. shipyards combined. While the PLAN's growth has made the largest name in the world, the U.S. Navy remains likely more capable on most measures, including physical size, VLS cells, and joint warfighting capability. However, the overall trend is towards greater size and capability in the PLAN. The chart on the right shows the age of the U.S. and Chinese fleets. The PRC's fleet is newer and more recently designed almost across the board. On the next slide, we see that U.S. shipyards are struggling. This is no secret. Everyone knows that the U.S. shipbuilding industry is having difficult times, including and especially the military shipbuilding sector. Critical issues are well known, including aging infrastructure, outdated production practices, and most crucially, a need for a massively expanded skilled workforce, which is an especially challenging problem. Shipyards need specialized labor, and they're struggling to recruit talent in the regions. We can see on the right a map from an upcoming CSIS analysis of the shipbuilding labor workforce that shipyard labor is difficult to find, particularly in regions where shipbuilders are actually located. The map portrays the Gulf region, where there are a bunch of shipbuilders clustered together, and then colored in are where actual shipbuilding workforces are. And we can see that despite there being large existing workforces, given the level of demand needed and projected by the Navy in the future, that workforce is needed to expand massively and quickly. But shipbuilding is an art. It's hard to build a workforce quickly, and it's hard to train a welder to be truly proficient as a shipbuilder within more than 5 years. Expanding capacity wouldn't just require more people, it also require more space, which is hard to come by, as much of the land that is deep water accessible on the coast has already been put to other productive economic uses. While you can buy it back, you can't just launch a ship anywhere, and that is expensive and takes time. On top of the military shipbuilding challenges, the broader U.S. maritime industrial base has withered away since the 20th century, leaving little surge capacity, shrinking supply chain depth, and denying the military shipbuilding sector the opportunity to benefit from economies of scale. So as shown on the next slide, U.S. allies are actually doing better on shipbuilding, particularly commercial shipbuilding. Unlike the United States, South Korea and Japan have impressive shipbuilding industries and makes them valuable potential partners. While China does produce more ships overall due to its greater number of shipyards, South Korea and Japanese shipyards continue to lead the world in contemporary productivity due to their technological advancements. Both nations have made concerted, long-term investments into their shipbuilding bases through a variety of industrial efforts and technological advances. They also have great experience in modular production techniques and widespread use of automation in shipbuilding. Both nations are also close U.S. allies with deep histories of defense industrial cooperation with the United States, and they also share a threat environment, making them natural cooperations for the natural partners for the United States to cooperate with. I'm now going to give a quick overview of our proposed pathways on the next slide. These are the 4 options that our site is exploring for possible U.S. cooperation with allies such as South Korea and Japan. First, we have allied MRO to free up U.S. capacity, ideally for shipbuilding activities. Second, we have allied purchase of U.S. yards to rebuild and revitalize their production capabilities. Third, we're going to look at joint modular co-production of ships. And lastly, we're going to look at the US buying naval ships directly from allied yards. So to quickly jump in to our first pathway on the next slide, we can see that due to shipyard capacity limitations, the US Navy is estimated to be around 20 years behind on its maintenance work, leading to the decommissioning of viable ships as a result of its inability to conduct core MRO, modernization, and service life extensions. To respond to this problem, the US has already begun laying the groundwork for greater MRO cooperation across the entire Indo-Pacific on a variety of industrial topics through the Regional Sustainment Framework. The US Navy has already had the USS Milius, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer maintained by MHI in Japan, and the USNS Wally Schirra, serviced by Hanwha Ocean in Korea. That's pictured on the right. Shifting these MRO responsibilities abroad could possibly free up yard space in the US for shipbuilding, but it is really important to stress that repair and construction yards are not the same. It would require significant time, money, and effort to convert these yards over from repair to production if one wanted to do that. And it does make it a turnkey solution. Also, the effect of shifting MRO work from US yards to our allies is unclear. Given that MRO demand seems to outstrip supply right now, there is still a critical role that MRO work provides in sort of saying a baseline profitability for some yards. And more study is needed to determine what that actual effect would be on the health of the industry. Moreover, allied yards may not see much of an incentive to cooperate directly with the Navy if it's only on MRO work. They tend to care more about shipbuilding given the higher profit margins on shipbuilding. And so any international cooperation actually needs to take into account whether our allies and partners are incentivized and motivated to participate. On the next slide, Pathway 2 is going to look at the foreign purchase of US yards. There's been a lot of discussion and a lot of interest in foreign acquisitions of US yards recently. The goal of all of this would be for purchasers to impart their home nation and parent shipbuilding firms' shipbuilding expertise and efficiencies here into the US maritime industrial base. This can take a series of different forms, the main versions which are outlined here. The purchase of an existing military yard, the purchase of a commercial or defunct military yard. So think of something like Hanwha buying Philly Shipyard. Or it could be the creation of an entirely new government-owned commercially operated yard with a foreign operator. There also are some other options like private joint ventures within the footprint of existing US yards. Regardless of the specific actual method, here or subpathway, the key question regarding international acquisition of any of these yards is whether or not new ownership will actually improve shipyard performance. Given that the US workforce and material input costs are going to remain largely unchanged in any of these scenarios, the key theorized drivers of improvement would have to be altered management practices, possible cross-training of shipyard workforces, and technology transfer of more advanced shipbuilding techniques to the United States. This would also require some substantial capital infusions to implement any new technique here. However, the US is really used to doing technology transfer to its allies, and not so much the other way around. This may make implementation and the successful reaping of potential rewards difficult when implementing this sort of pathway. We have historical examples here to pull on, recent historical too. Fincantieri of Italy and Austal of Australia both show that foreign ownership can provide rewards in innovative capabilities and bringing automation to US defense production, especially US shipbuilding production. However, US overclassification of requirements and regulations limit how much foreign expertise can be brought to bear from parent firms to the US subsidiaries. These regulations may somewhat defeat the aims of policy moves to encourage foreign purchase. On the next slide, we're going to look at our next pathway, which is modularity. Modularity as an enabler for shipbuilding cooperation can take a wide number of forms. The most relevant and simplified versions of modular co-production are allied wholes being completed with US systems, or allied-built modules being assembled alongside US-built modules in US shipyards. Again, there are multiple kinds of modularity. We can think of it as sort of the modularity where you're building ships like Lego bricks next to each other, or you're bolting systems into pre-built holes. Whatever the specifics are, modular co-production could allow for the use of allied capacity right alongside US capacity, strengthening the industrial partnerships with either the ROK or Japan, and offering another possible technology transfer pathways as companies work closer together. Modularity can also be combined with existing ideas about the distribution of naval production across the United States, known as nation as a shipyard or federated shipbuilding. The idea being to take the work out away from those coastal regions where workforces are tapped out, home prices are high, and move it more inland towards the Midwest. Well, in addition to that, you can also move it towards international companies and international countries which have different workforces that can be tapped. That said, there are regulatory concerns about the movement of modules, the movement of information, the transmission of requirements. There are also concerns about how efficient distributed production of ships can be in practice, as well as monitor co-production's impact on production timelines given the increased program complexity. You're not just building one ship in one yard, or even one ship in 2 yards across the same nation. Now think of one ship across multiple yards in multiple nations. You can imagine why a program manager might shudder at the thought. The rewards may be worth it, though. And there has been success in the past. Past examples include Virginia-class submarines and several LPD-17 Flight 1 classes being built in response to Hurricane Katrina. On the next slide, we're going to look at the last pathway, which is purchasing foreign ships. This is perhaps the most difficult and unlikely pathway, though it could have the potential to deliver the most capability to the Navy in the shortest time frame. There are various subpathways here again, differing essentially on what design a foreign yard might build. It could be a US design, it could be a new co-developed design, or it could be an existing allied design. Each approach has its own challenges. A US design could take time to license and export to get it to that foreign shipyard. And it would also introduce difficult US Navy requirements and standards to the process. That could really slow down the production at that foreign yard, given that foreign yards are not used to working these requirements and standards, and also that these requirements and standards are pretty exacting and are largely unique on the worldwide scale. It's not like it's an ISO, XYZ part. It's a little different. A new design, sort of that new co-produced option, the second subpathway, would take a lot of time to develop. We all know that designing ships takes a long time. Building ships takes an even longer time. And the incurred time costs of a new co-developed design, not to mention the complexity of actually agreeing on one, is sort of antithetical to the argument of delivering new capability quickly. Now, the third subpathway here, buying an allied design and having it built in an allied yard, would likely be the fastest and also probably the most economical, given the returns to the scale of essentially buying a ship off the shelf, considering that most of these foreign yards are going to already build these ships for their local navies, or maybe export. But buying a pre-existing design would require the USN to compromise on its requirements. And that's something we've seen some difficulty with in the past. Think of the Constellation class, where we started with around, some people report 85% commonality with the FREM. And now by the time I think of about a year ago, it's down to around 15% reported familiarity with the FREM. And that has incurred a lot of cost and time. So an allied design would be great in theory, but difficult to probably integrate. With all those difficulties being said, there are natural places to start this sort of cooperation. There's a shared basis of commonality between US surface warships and allied produced warships, especially in the area of Aegis-equipped destroyers. And there's also the possibility of using support ships, which are less stringent in terms of requirements typically, and are also less politically charged. However, this pathway still faces overall issues, such as the interoperability of new ships with the existing fleet, differing standards and requirements, the issues of exportability, and most critically of all, the potential impact on the health of the US shipbuilding industry, which must be and should be the core concern of US policymakers. While the United States has some partnerships with other nations on specific programs, relying on allies and partners as a complete solution to capability gaps would be unprecedented in US history. The health of the US shipbuilding industry is also not just a national security concern, it's also a core political concern, given the well-documented impact of shipyards on their local economies and the interest of Congress in ensuring continued domestic capability. So moving now to conclusions on the next slide, we can see that a lack of progress on shipbuilding within the United States, the increasingly pressing threat of a fraught naval war with China breaking out, and recent shifts in political support for more creative solutions mean that there may be a window of opportunity here for the Navy to consider adopting novel strategies that leverage the United States' unique strength, its network of allies and partners. However, security cooperation policy is difficult to get right, and industrial cooperation policy can be even harder. The US is making path-dependent critical decisions right now, and it's important to get these decisions right. These pathways can help provide a guide towards understanding possible forms of cooperation, but they're simplifications of very complex systems that interact with each other constantly. Pursuing two pathways at the same time may impede the success of both, given interdependencies. The US government may want to consider what its regulations and policies may need to change to implement these goals to revitalize the US maritime industrial base, particularly if they're including allies and partners. Our ongoing project aims to support policymakers as they grapple with these difficult but critical questions. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions later.
Henry, thank you for a great start. I'm going to now turn the floor over to Sean.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Sean Merrill. As noted, I'm a senior analyst with GAO's Contracting and National Security Acquisitions team. I've worked on a variety of issues related to DoD weapon systems for over 20 years, with the last decade focused largely on different aspects of Navy shipbuilding. As I'll begin discussing in further detail on the next slide, my presentation today focuses on the ship design work we completed in May of last year. For our review of ship design practices, we focused on addressing two key things. First, what are the leading practices used by major ship buyers and builders in the global marketplace? And second, how do Navy ship design practices compare to leading commercial practices? To address the commercial practices question, we used a range of criteria to identify companies that are considered leaders in the industry that design, build, and buy large, complex vessels. For the Navy practices, we worked with the Navy shipbuilding programs and their stakeholders, as well as the major shipbuilders that support the range of Navy classes to understand the current state of their practices. One note, in case you're wondering why I'm referring to builders and buyers and not designers. We found in both commercial and Navy shipbuilding, the builders are generally the lead designers, with the buyers having design capabilities that typically focus on earlier stages of design. As we move to the next slide, you'll see what I think is a good illustration of why we undertook this extensive review. So you don't have to look at this figure too long to see there's a stark contrast in the typical cycle times to deliver commercial ships versus Navy ships. Before I begin discussing how the use of leading ship design practices help commercial companies achieve this contrast, I want to emphasize that this figure in our broader work is not suggesting that the Navy should be achieving the commercial cycle times down to the months, nor is our work pushing for the Navy to use commercial ship designs to meet military needs. Instead, the figure sets the stage for the practices that I'll introduce on the next slide and the subsequent discussion of each one and how the Navy practices compare. So when taking stock of all the information we gained during our review from our interactions with commercial ship buyers and builders, we found 4 leading ship design practices contribute to timely, predictable outcomes for their new ship builds. First, they establish sound business cases and requirements. Second, they use iterative design to accelerate design progress and maturity. Third, they use efficient collaboration and decision-making practices. And fourth, they employ strong in-house design capabilities and tools. Beginning with the next slide, I'll briefly walk through what we found for each practice. So starting with business case and requirements, we found that commercial companies focus on schedule-driven design and decision-making that make the ship delivery date the top priority for any given program. As part of this, commercial ship buyers and builders agree to fixed price, fixed delivery contracts that have significant financial repercussions for delayed delivery. Within this construct, it demands flexibility and requirements, with trade-offs made to forego or defer desired capabilities if their inclusion in a ship's design will delay the ship delivery. The buyers would rather pursue such capabilities for a future ship when their inclusion can be aligned with the schedule expectations. And commercial buyers also emphasize that the business case should be revisited during design and construction to ensure it remains relevant. This includes demonstrating a commitment to make significant changes to a ship design if it cannot be achieved within the available schedule or no longer meets user needs. Contrasting to commercial practices, we found the Navy requirements setting process generally takes years to accomplish what takes months for commercial industry. For example, it took over 4 years to validate the program requirements for the Navy's most recent flight of DDG-51 class destroyers. This elongated process hinders flexibility, especially once the requirements are approved, which can drive extra time into design if it proves more challenging than expected to meet the requirements. The Navy practices we found also do not demonstrate the type of continued reevaluation of the business case found in commercial industry. This increases the Navy's risk of investing resources in ship designs with capabilities that are no longer needed. With the next slide, we'll move further into design practices by discussing the use of iterative design. But first, let me define iterative design practices, because I know that's a word. Iterative is a word that's thrown around a lot in different circles. In general, these practices reflect a cyclical process to determine what capabilities are achievable within a fixed period, design and deliver one or more ships with those capabilities, and then repeat this process for successive ship designs. Additionally, commercial industry's ability to leverage existing designs for new ships, isolate and minimize the amount of new design required for ships, and ensure direct user involvement in design teams are all fundamental to the effectiveness of their iterative design practices. The buyers and builders in our review were adept at not reinventing what doesn't need reinvention. They devoted significant time and attention to pursuing strategic innovations within designs that can be balanced with the extensive reuse of existing design knowledge. They were also motivated to finalize agreements with vendors for equipment as early as possible to minimize their design uncertainties. For the Navy, we found several notable contrasts that I've outlined here, and I'll emphasize just a couple of them. First, the Navy does not have the type of digital design library that we consistently found used by different commercial companies to accelerate their design maturity for new vessels. Second, though I'll talk more about more about decision-making on the next slide, the Navy typically proceeds with setting schedule, cost, and capability requirements for its ships well before having a stable design, which increases the risk that their business case for their new ships will erode because of the requirements being set before the design is sufficiently matured and understood. Shifting to collaboration and decision-making practices, commercial ship buyers and builders use consistent, effective collaboration to support timely decision-making from early design concept all the way to ship delivery. Their extensive upfront communication establishes a common understanding of ship requirements, schedule, and cost before contract award, which accelerates design maturity and minimizes potential discovery of issues in later stages of design and construction. For decision-making, they focus on delegating authority to lower working levels whenever possible, such as a project manager for a specific design element, and use short review and comment periods for design products. Typically, we're looking at 10 to 21 days for buyers to review and respond to a design product, or that product would be approved by default after that time. Within the Navy, we found programs generally have less direct communication with builders prior to contract award. Additionally, the Navy has many stakeholders with the authority to affect design decisions, which contributes to prolonged timelines for reviewing and approving design products. We found generally those ranged from 21 to 60 days and sometimes longer. And you're talking about, in many cases, hundreds of those design products going through that process. When making key programmatic decisions, we found that the Navy practices also have a less consistent and clear connection between the design maturity data and their decision-making. In particular, the Navy's lack of an expectation for ship design stability to be demonstrated using 3D modeling before starting construction is a significant departure from the leading practices. And we believe that it's one of the main contributors to persistent challenges that Navy shipbuilding programs have had in meeting their cost, schedule, and performance expectations. Moving to our slide on the fourth and final leading practice. While not necessarily equal in size and type, commercial ship buyers and builders maintain strength in their design workforces to ensure that both sides have a firm and common understanding of the ship design concept and required performance before agreeing to pricing and delivery dates. For design tools, while companies varied in the extent to which they had adopted certain modern tools like digital twinning and augmented reality, they collectively agreed that their use of modern digital tools has created efficiencies for design validation, optimization, and completion. For example, advances in 3D modeling capability over the last 15 years have enabled builders to mature all levels of design earlier in the overall project cycle. And modern tools have also automated the identification and correction of design problems that previously could have led to unexpected changes during construction. For the Navy, our work happened to coincide with the department's recognition of some shortfalls in its design workforce. The Navy's response to address those shortfalls was a work in progress when we issued our report last year, and I expect that that work continues within the Navy. The Navy and its shipbuilders for tools echoed the significant advancements in 3D modeling capabilities as well as some others, and recognized the potential improvements that further adoption of modern digital tools can offer for ship design. Though we found instances of early adoption of some tools like augmented reality and shipyard digital twinning within Navy shipbuilding programs, we also found Navy programs generally encounter more challenges in integrating 3D modeling capabilities with other information systems to maximize the potential of that information. Incompatibility of legacy systems for older shipbuilding programs like the Arleigh Burkes or Virginia class is one of the contributing factors that can weigh down on the integration that I noted. So with the leading practices now described, I'll move to my final slide that highlights areas of opportunity for Navy shipbuilding programs to use them. So the opportunities listed here reflect many of the recommendations we made directly to the Navy. First, achieving a stable design for a new ship before awarding a contract for its construction would strengthen the confidence in schedule, cost, and performance expectations. And it also supports shorter contract timelines to design and deliver new ships. The points following on design certification and standardization of design measures continue the focus of achieving sufficient design knowledge to support key program decisions and the start of construction. And then the last 4 points center around leveraging leading practices to accelerate or compress the time needed to move from a design concept to a delivered ship that provides needed capabilities to Navy users. To conclude, I'd note that the Navy largely agreed with the recommendations we made associated with these points. So we're looking forward to seeing changes implemented that embrace the leading practices and contribute to improvements for the Navy shipbuilding programs. Thank you.
Sean, thank you very much. Now, last but not least, over to Bob.
Thank you. And what I'll do is I'll build on a lot of what Henry and Sean presented, and we're going to take a specific example with the U.S. Marine Corps landing craft case study. I'm presenting this research on behalf of my co-researcher, Major Sean Irvine from the United States Marine Corps. And we all have a kind of a picture of what acquisition is, and we'll get to that. The general approach here and why this is so important, case studies allow us to develop skills such as critical thinking, stakeholder engagement, decision-making, strategic leadership. So this case study-based research is widely applicable to the defense acquisition workforce. Now, what do we all think about acquisition? This is usually the framework that we picture, and obviously this looks very complex. We can simplify for the purpose of our research to that framework, to this big A picture of acquisition, with the program manager trying to balance cost, schedule, and performance. The program manager is using the way the Department of Defense works and runs through the 3 decision support systems. We get requirements from the user and the warfighter. We get resources through the planning, programming, and budgeting execution system. And then we leverage the little a of acquisition, or the adaptive acquisition framework, to manage and execute these efforts. In this case study, we'll be leveraging that adaptive acquisition pathway, and we're going to be looking at whether middle tier of acquisition or a major capability acquisition pathway better meets the needs of the warfighter. Of course, the Navy does have specific guidance and SecNav instruction, and that instruction highlights how the Navy implements the adaptive acquisition workforce and how milestone decision authorities tailor their strategies and work with the service chiefs on that acquisition program baseline of cost, schedule, performance, along with technical feasibility. The Navy also has a 2-pass, 7-gate governance structure that also reinforces the collaborative and disciplined and integrated nature of those 3 decision support systems of requirements, resourcing, and management. There's been plenty of research to keep in mind about our ships different, and they've been recognized already today as, first of all, usually there's no dedicated test assets. Every asset enters the service. The length of time to build and design the ship, as Admiral Anderson mentioned, is lengthy. We usually have a concurrency of design and build phases and an order of complexity that's very intense, along with a low quantity and production rate. So it's important to keep these background cases in mind as we look at this specific case study of the U.S. Marine Corps landing craft system. The program is officially the Landing Ship Medium, or LCM, and that's a priority program for the United States Marine Corps in accordance with their Force Design 2030, and they identify a need for 35 ships. The Marine littoral regiments need the ability to move company-sized forces, and currently they need something larger than the landing craft cushion and the landing craft utility, and they need something smaller than the landing platform dock. The acquisition strategy generally outlines a need for 35 ships in about the $150 million range, with an initial operation capability date of 28, using a modified commercial design approach initially. The requirements, the unique Marine Corps requirements, are listed here. And the key thing to look at is that the Marine Corps is focused on mobility and survivability to hide among commercial shipping lanes in the surrounding Pacific Islands. In any case study, we have to understand and analyze and engage with the stakeholders, and some of the stakeholders that are involved in this program are listed here. The main issue here is that the Navy has concerns. The Navy has concerns about the survivability requirements that are laid out, and if those survivability requirements are increased, the AUPC or the cost would increase to the $350 million range. And there's also uncertainty about the acquisition objective. And the root cause of this is the analysis of alternatives was never approved. And there's a very limited shipbuilding budget, as we all know. The background of this program is listed here. And the bottom line is there has been concept design contracts let, and those are taking place through a preliminary design review. And again, the analysis of alternatives, so, has not been approved due to the fact that there's very similar capabilities existing, for example, within the United States Army Transportation Command. The procurement contract is expected to be awarded in 25 this year, and that's the initial cost of the first ship. And then follow-on procurement contracts would be let over the next following years, and the price per ship would go down accordingly with a learning rate effect. The program challenges. The first here is that 35 landing ship mediums would require a number of junior naval officers, and there might be concern that these new officers might be at a comparative disadvantage than their counterparts that are commanding bigger that have bigger warship experience. The survivability requirements might lead to an increase again of that cost. The Navy supports only 18 ships, while the Marine Corps says it needs 35. The Marine Corps is valuing delivery, speed of delivery over before determining the final requirements. Obviously, the defense industrial base and from a capacity and a capability standpoint would have to struggle with trying to produce 4 landing ship mediums per year if they were able to complete that buy within the 5-year time period. And the Navy prefers a single shipyard to manufacture all the ships rather than a multi-shipyard approach. You can look at this case study and kind of think of 3 major decisions to try to analyze. The first is, what's the best option to solve this capability gap? And there are options to consider. Using existing ships, you could do a joint program with the Army's program, or you could go straight commercial off the shelf, or have a unique program of record. That's the first question we're going to analyze. The second question we're going to analyze is, if the analysis of alternatives does justify a material solution, what's the best acquisition pathway to follow? And we can look and analyze the difference between following a middle tier of acquisition approach or a major capability of acquisition approach and entering at various milestones. And finally, from a competition standpoint and contracting standpoint, is it better to have a single domestic shipbuilder or multiple domestic and international shipbuilders involved? And so we're going to analyze each of these questions to try to gain insights to better inform decision making. So the first question is here, how do we fill this gap? And we can leverage a decision matrix to try to analyze the various options that are down the left-hand part of the slide. And we can analyze these options against criteria. For example, does it meet performance requirements, schedule requirements, cost, what's the impact on technical and manufacturing risk with that strategy, and then how does it support the industrial base? We can qualitatively rank each of these criteria. For example, for meeting the performance requirements, the landing ship medium program would meet the Marine Corps requirements the best. And we can qualitatively rank each of these decision criteria. For schedule, acquiring a commercial off-the-shelf vessel would be best in schedule. Using existing ships is obviously the lowest cost and the lowest technical risk. And then a joint program would be best for the industrial base to support a healthy, robust industrial base. We can look at that and that comparison and do a capability gap analysis then. Using the existing ships is the worst in meeting performance requirements, operational need dates, and with respect to industrial considerations, it's probably not a viable option because of that. If performance requirements and industrial considerations are more important than budget and schedule and technical risk, then the Marine Corps should probably pursue a program of record. When comparing the program of record to the joint program with the Army, the Marine Corps specific requirements would have to be weighted more important by leadership than the potential cost savings that would be incurred from a joint program. We go to the second question now. What is the best acquisition pathway? Middle tier of acquisition or a major capability acquisition pathway? In this case, the performance costs and industrial-based considerations are really non-discriminating, and they don't really distinguish between these various acquisition strategies. This really comes down to a question of schedule. Which of these pathways would produce a capability faster? If we pursued a middle tier of acquisition approach, or the Marine Corps pursued a middle tier of acquisition approach, they might get a capability faster. And you weigh that against technical and manufacturing risk of pursuing that fast acquisition. So if we analyze this, the acquisition pathway analysis, again, performance, cost, and industrial-based considerations are really non-discriminating. The choice between a middle tier of acquisition and a major capability acquisition pathway comes down to schedule, going fast, versus the risk. It increases the risk, the technical and manufacturing risk of that program. We have to keep in mind that the middle tier of acquisition, although it sets a 5-year time objective, that's arbitrary. That's not related to specific technology objectives or requirements. So we can't have recency bias to go down a middle tier of acquisition approach just because it says a 5-year objective. And it really goes back to the triple constraint. To meet a specific need date, meaning your schedule is set, the programs really have one major choice here. You can reduce the cost and the technical risk by trading off requirements. And that's an incremental approach or an iterative approach that Sean mentioned. And finally, if we talk about competition, we can compare a single domestic shipbuilder versus multiple domestic shipbuilders, or include international shipbuilding, again, against these criteria of schedule, cost, technical and manufacturing risk, industrial base, and security. And we can compare each of those factors, and what this allows us to do is, again, analyze this and get more insights into this decision that the Navy and the Marine Corps have to face. If we analyze that, we can say cost and schedule criteria are driven by the amount of competition, obviously, and the more competition is better. We all know that. The decision comes down to a trade-off between schedule and cost versus risk and security considerations. A single shipbuilder is best for risk and security due to better configuration and oversight control, but multiple domestic shipbuilders is probably a good balanced option when factoring in the advantages to the domestic shipbuilding defense industrial base. In conclusion, what this analysis allows us to do is come to some recommendations that the Marine Corps and the Navy should consider. they probably should consider continuing to leverage that modified commercial off-the-shelf design approach to reduce risk, prioritize schedule, and meet as much of the unique United States Marine Corps requirements as possible. They should consider an incremental approach. And one way to do that is initiating the program through a prototyping, fielding, and experimentation effort through a military of acquisition with minimal requirements, and then transitioning to a program of record at a milestone B or C, whatever's in accordance with the desired user's end state requirements and schedule. And then finally, consider leveraging multiple domestic shipyards over a single or an international shipyard. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions. And what I'll do is stop sharing.
All right, greetings. Well, 3 great presentations, and clearly very well aligned with the discussion on how do we get more ships out in service for our U.S. Navy. I have a number of questions in the Q&A area, so I'll walk through those for our panel members. I will read the question. I will ask one of you to take point, and then after that person talks, I will pause to see if there are other panel members that want to weigh in. Some of these are pretty broad-reaching, so multiple panel members may have thoughts on it. Okay, first question talks about the growth of Chinese shipbuilding post-World War II and Korea since the Korean War, and talks about the U.S. Largely. I'll steal the language from the question, walking away from commercial shipbuilding. And the question is the U.S. interested in facilitating cooperation between the U.S. industrial base and the Japanese industrial base to bring the U.S. Into parity? I'll answer the question generically, which I think the U.S. of course would be interested in working with the Japanese to accelerate our proficiency in the commercial industrial base. In general, Japan controls a fairly large portion of the world's commercial shipbuilding, probably the 3rd largest commercial shipbuilder in the world, and we clearly are not very high on that list. So I will go over to Henry to see if during any of your studies you have seen examples of where we might be pursuing that opportunity, or where you see there might be opportunity.
Thanks so much. Yeah, first of all, obviously can't speak for the USG, but I'm happy to talk about what we've seen so far from the outside. So on the premise of the question, understand and agree that their technology has really surpassed that of the US, particularly since, as the commenter rightly pointed out, we did seed the commercial sector in the 20th century. Commercial technology, obviously not identical to that which would be used in naval construction, but there are clear cross-applicabilities in terms of leading practices in automation. Also, even stuff like berth design for a destroyer is not necessarily mill-specific. So there are a lot of potential benefits there. And this is sort of the core idea with technology transfer that I was getting at in the presentation. It's just something we're less comfortable being on the receiving end of. We really are going to have to build new muscle memory as we seek to take this on. We're much more comfortable with the sort of process and activity structure of doing technology transfer towards our allies. That said, we actually have tried this in the past, even with Japan. So there's a bit of a limited literature suggesting that there might be possible returns to technology transfer from advanced nations like Japan. So like a 1987 study by Hiroshi Sasaki found that Japan's IHI tech transfer efforts to US shipbuilders, which were largely based on building on IHI's advanced techniques like block construction, process lane systems, and the emphasis on material management, were able to improve productivity when they were brought here to the United States. But they also didn't actually succeed in catching US shipyards fully up to Japanese standards. Now, that's only one study, and it was also in 1987. So I think there's a need for more comprehensive and more recent studies. But there's interest there, there's academic interest there. And then also on the government side, there has been some work by USG to work more closely with the ROK in Japan on ships recently. Obviously, we've got some MRO agreements with firms in both countries. We talked about some of those. And on top of that, looking at DICAS, the Defense Industrial Cooperation Acquisition Sustainment Agreement, With Japan, there is a ship repair working group. So early stages yet, but there does seem to be some interest from USG, and there's also some supporting academic literature to suggest that this would be a really good idea. So thanks for the question.
And I'll pause for a second if there's anyone else, any other thoughts? Okay, thank you. I'll move on to the next question, which talks a little bit about fixed price and cost plus contracts. It says, although fixed price cost contracts might be preferred by the acquirers, are there considerations to utilize cost plus contracts to incentivize shipbuilding? And I will share from my own personal perspective that the contract type to be used really is about the risk sharing associated with the program, right? Some programs have lower risk, and as a result of being lower risk, it's fairly straightforward to move to a fixed price contract. Then we get to fixed price incentive type contracts, and then where we have significant risk to be shared, in most cases, first of class complex vessels. We're talking cost plus contract, although over the years, the Navy's position on those acquisitions has varied quite a bit. I would ask maybe Bob, based on the work you're doing with assessing LSM, any thoughts on the use of fixed price and cost plus contract vehicles?
Well, Admiral Anderson, I appreciate your take on that, because I could agree that it is about risk, and who assumes most of the risk, and so the choice of the contract type, we have to in the government, we have to pick that contract type based on each individual program, and as a design matures and the technologies mature throughout the development process, of course, we usually do shift to more fixed price type situations. I've seen over the years many acquisition reform initiatives where there was an aversion to not using cost plus contracts for development efforts, and unfortunately, they don't usually end up well, because the risk that the contractor prices into that to accept a fixed price type contract, they just jack up the price because they have a huge amount of risk, and there's no guarantee that we ever get what we want in the end. So that's kind of my take. It's not specific to shipbuilding, though.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. And I'll pause again to see if anyone else has thoughts on contract types. Okay. The next one on here is, Sean, I'll let you know it's coming to you because it starts out with, did GAO? It talks about, did GAO find world-class shipbuilders use a common product lifecycle management and integrated product design environment? Do you have thoughts on that? Is that within your wheelhouse to talk to?
I'll just a little bit. And I appreciate seeing that Jeff is here. We interacted with him when we were doing this review. So thank you for the attendance. What I would say is that we did not necessarily see the commercial industry using the same systems, but we definitely did see a very concerted effort between using the advances in 3D modeling systems along with product lifecycle management and enterprise resource planning systems to bring all of that information together much more seamlessly at the yards. And I would say it was in, varying degrees of completion, depending on where you went, even in the commercial sector. Some of them were still in the process of like really nailing down how that was all going to work, and others seem to have it a bit more in place and were executing. So if the question is there like a singular solution, which I know that's sometimes a challenge for the Navy because you have, different shipyards using different systems, and the Navy potentially wanting some form of commonality, and like, can you even get there? I didn't see that in the commercial sector, but if the question is more just about like bringing all of that information together, that certainly was like a big place where there was a lot of investment going on, because I think that was like one of the places where they saw some clear efficiencies that were still out there for them to be gained.
Excellent. Any other thoughts from our panelists before we move on to the next question? Okay, thanks, Sean. Okay, Jose wrote us a question, and as I'm reading through it, I think there's several questions here worth or points worth talking about. It starts with a little discussion about reducing the design cycle by working with our allies. And I would welcome a little bit of discussion on what our thoughts are, what the panelist members' thoughts on our ability to actually decrease our design cycles by working with our allies. And I'll share a thought from my own perspective, whether it's allies or whether it's commercial capability within the United States. You know, where we have designs that are close to our requirement set that are existing and proven, we should be leveraging them, right? So in many cases, we'll come up with a requirement set, and that requirement set will be some form of stretch goal associated with platforms that already exist. And then we start, you know, designing from a clean sheet, or we try to modify an existing design. Quite frankly, within the Navy, we're having lots of discussions about, hey, do I really need that delta that I get in the change of requirement, or should I just move out with procuring a design that's already proven and being executed on by someone? I'll give you an example within my portfolio. We've had quite a bit of discussion about cable tenders. You know, we buy a ship called T-ARC, which are cable layers. And for a couple of years, we've had a very nuanced discussion about additional capability we want to put on there. But in the meantime, we're renting commercial cable layers to do our business. So we probably can live with commercial cable layers, and there's lots of designs out there for commercial cable layers. So I guess I'd first start with the discussion, and I'll go back to Henry on the discussion on being able to leverage commercial design from our allies. Your thoughts on the ability to do that, and the industrial base that they have with regards to design.
Thanks so much. Yeah, this is a great question. I think part of the complexity here is there are so many ways to work with allies and so many ways to try to go about reducing design cycle. If we think about it, there are like a couple of different models this could look like, right? Working with allies on design could be something like F-35, an incredibly complicated to manage program with a bunch of international stakeholders. I don't think anyone would say that that's like a way to reduce design time necessarily. There are other approaches like the FREM approach, where you take an existing design and modify it. And then the sort of a more idealized commercial off-the-shelf approach where your ally has it, it works, you just buy it. So in terms of, can we work with our allies to reduce design cycles? Absolutely. But that is best done in sort of more of that commercial off-the-shelf approach, where they have something and we can certify that essentially it's good enough. If you're thinking of reducing design by maybe leveraging allied capabilities in, for example, you know, naval architecture, naval design, that is something that they have great workforces on because of their commercial sector, which gives them a bit of a deeper bench than we might have. But at the same time, when you introduce other stakeholders and actors, that may also stretch out timelines. If you're, for example, trying to co-develop a design, that can create its own problems. So that's sort of a qualified yes, but it depends on what kind of design cooperation you're trying to do.
That's perfect. Thank you for that. I'm going to actually morph the question a little bit, and I'm going to ask Sean to weigh in. So, Sean, as you were talking through the points on you know, commercial design and what learning there is to be had from that, I was thinking that in my experience, while we have a limited pool of expertise in the United States on commercial design, there is a huge pool of commercial design out with our international partners. My personal interactions with South Korea, Japan, and Finland really opened my eyes to different ecosystems that exist. And when I came back and I talked to many of our commercial builders about how they go about doing their work, many of them leverage those international designs as the product they bring in. Can you talk a little bit about your observations? Have you had the opportunity to look into that international design ecosystem, and if you have any thoughts on how we might be able to leverage that?
Sure. Yeah, it's I mean, I love this subject. You know, there are some very, I think, distinct philosophies out there. You know, it goes beyond just US versus, it's not US versus international. Like, you know, Europe, I think, is profoundly different than so like the South Koreans, for example. So, like I think, culturally and philosophically, there are always going to be some things that aren't quite the same, but you definitely do see them trying to like lean into where they see those opportunities that somebody else is demonstrating to be better. I will tell you that we also talked as we were doing the work. I didn't get into this, but like to the extent that we were talking to commercial companies that also dealt with military, not our military, but dealt with, like Italy, for example. They, they will acknowledge that like building military ships is harder, right? In certain ways, like if nothing else, that you're working with government versus another company, right? A company buyer. So there are layers to that, but I think they do still take advantage of their commercial philosophies, and I think that's one of the challenges that the U.S. has, and I know it's a hot topic now. The atrophy of our commercial ship industrial base. You can see if you just go look at some of the other countries that have both, you can see the effects of not having the commercial, because things like the investments in being as modern as possible are much easier to make a business case at times on the commercial side than it is when the government has all these competing demands. And if you take the US, we're just trying to keep up with delivering as many ships as we need. And we know that that's been a real challenge for a while. So I think that, there's a lot of learning that we can do. Going back to something that Henry said, I do think that, and I guess you alluded to it too, I do think it's very difficult to just take an international design and bring it over here and say like, well, let's just use this. If you look at our survivability requirements alone, there are tons of trades that would have to be made there. So, we've talked about risk a lot here. It becomes a question that maybe if we need to go faster, do we have to make decisions on certain types of classes? We're willing to accept more risk to be more like something that already exists in order to get them out there faster? Or are those risks not acceptable, in which case we're going to have to accept that we may not be able to leverage some of those designs that are out there that others are taking advantage of?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Those are great points, and maybe that lends itself to a follow up for Bob, who talked a little bit about LSM, and there's certainly trade-offs being made, right now with regards to the LSM program. And I say trade-offs from the perspective of if you listen to the Marine Corps and their narrative on LSM, and we talk about the risk associated with the requirements for that platform, they would tell you that they have 100% risk today because they don't have those ships to use, right? So, Bob, do you have any other thoughts on that with regards to the risk calculus and how much risk we take in a platform that may, not meet all our historical requirement sets for survivability versus, hey, if I don't have a ship, I'm not there and I'm not able to, actively participate, and that's ultimate risk. You have thoughts on that based on your study work?
No, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer though, but I can give you my opinion or my perspective from looking at the shipbuilding programs, and the LSM is a good example of that, because the original strategy again was a commercial off-the-shelf design, and the cost reflects that, But if you add the typical warfight ship survivability requirements and a little bit of lethality requirements, not much, you suddenly double or triple the projected cost of that ship. And so what is so that's a combination of, the operational risk. Like you said, the Marine Corps might argue right now they don't have anything. We do have some options. They're just not optimized for that specific mission. And so, but it does go back to that risk, and it's more from the operational standpoint, is what risk are we willing to, is speed of delivery better than using another option? And I think in the end, it's what the outcome is. We want capability overmatch. And so of course, we want to leverage commercial technologies as best we can, but we want to leverage those commercial technologies in shipbuilding to give us capability overmatch at the end. And if we're leveraging the commercial technologies and we're decreasing our capabilities by doing that, that's really where the operational risk comes in. And that's, where that integrated product design and requirements generation process comes in, where you have all your stakeholders weighing in so we can make informed decisions.
That's great. Thanks for that insight. And I'm going to move to the next question here. And Sean, you're called out by name again on this one, popular guy. So the question really talks about digital twins and model-based acquisition. Can you talk about what you've seen with regards to best practices for incorporating this, or where we're lacking with regards to our getting after model-based acquisition?
Sure. So GAO has done some broader work on leading practices in product development in the last couple of years that goes beyond shipbuilding, and digital twinning is a huge facet to some of those leading capabilities that they were finding being used by a variety of sectors commercially. When we explored it specific to shipbuilding, I think the scale of ships oftentimes makes it a little more challenging from like a business case perspective to say we are going to digitally twin our entire ship. Nobody said it's a bad idea. It becomes that investment decision. What we definitely did see, though, if you want to kind of scale down a bit, we got a lot of consensus that there's strategic digital twinning most definitely going on. It might be, for example, doing an entire engine room where you're looking for opportunities where it both has advantages to design. It will have later advantages for maintenance, all the sustain. So you've got these assets that we all know last for decades. So you're trying to look at where can I spend my money to get the most return on it. So the same thing was happening in the commercial sector. They'd also do it when they were assessing options on potentially 5 different systems that all kind of do the same thing. And they're trying to figure out which one is the optimal one to pursue. And they might put that on an existing ship, for example, and have it be tested before they make any commitments to buy new ships. And they would sort out, all right, well, which one gives us, the best return? Use that, carry it over. They've got their twin capability. They also are, gaining all the information that comes with it. So, in terms of that question that I saw, we didn't find Navy doing twinning that the builders were then collaborating with on any particular programs. What we did find is everybody saw it as this is something that is coming. It's a matter of time, not a matter of, if we're going to do it, but it's definitely going to take some investment. We think that it would pay off on the backside. And I will note, we talked with Navantia, Spanish, the state-owned shipbuilder. They weren't ultimately part of the review because they were kind of an in-between, but we wanted to get an outside, kind of quasi-governmental, quasi-commercial perspective. And last I knew, at least, they were planning on their next frigate to focus on doing a digital twinning of the whole ship. So they might be, a forthcoming example of someone actually putting it in scale into action for a military vessel.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, and I love this next discussion topic because I think there's a lot there. Unfortunately, this may be our last one that we get to. So there's a question here about first. There's a statement which is one important external factor on whether the U.S. government undertakes a plausible and hugely expensive parallel effort to rebuild the U.S. commercial shipbuilding sector. So I think the argument there is, hey, it's a heavy lift to rebuild the commercial sector in the U.S. And then the question is, are there any recommendations that you would view as more or less important depending on the level of investment in the U.S. commercial sector? So I'll start with, I, quite frankly, until I got relatively senior in Navy acquisition, did not fully understand the models that exist in some of the big shipbuilding countries where commercial shipbuilding is the engine, and low overhead and easy access to workforce is the value for the government, for the Navy. Those models exist in multiple places, and certainly in the U.S. for the most part, the big customer who goes it alone is the U.S. government in shipbuilding, right? Like it's the model is inverted. So I'm really excited about, quite frankly, the administration's focus on and Congress's focus on attempting to bring back commercial shipbuilding in the U.S. It's clearly not a fast change, but it's one that would really pay benefits, I think, for the U.S. Navy for sure going forward. So the question to the group, and maybe I'll start with Henry on this, is Henry, as asked, what do you think the big moves are with regards to attempting to bring back in greater numbers commercial shipbuilding to the U.S.?
Right. Hard question. Something people have been working on for a while. So I'll characterize this as sort of a paths diverging in a wood style moment here, right? If the U.S. decides to do commercial shipbuilding revitalization, what does that mean for the naval side? I feel more qualified to answer that, I think. Mm-hmm. So if we have a better commercial sector, that would enable, in theory, better U.S. domestic only or U.S. allied blend options. So in our study, that'd be more like pathways 2 or 3. Either foreign buying U.S. yards that are strengthened by the broader ecosystem or modular co-production with those strengthened yards because of the returns to scale. We've got sort of trickle-down effects from supply chains workforce. That said, if you don't do a commercial side investment, that kind of makes a pathway 4, buying allied ships directly, make more sense, given that you sort of don't have those same theorized returns to scale. So the idea being basically you might want to go in together on commercial and naval, or I guess perhaps not. My only note of caution on the commercial revitalization, which would be fantastic, is just, as you mentioned, Admiral, the timeline. That could take years and years, potentially decades. And if we're looking for trickle-down effects, that's great in a decade. But if we're looking for capacity now, commercial revitalization may be less capable of helping us in the short term.
Great answer, great feedback. And I'll pause to see if the other panel members have thoughts on any kind of aspect of U.S. commercial sector going forward.
The only thing I would say is I know there's been other panels. There are challenges in just getting enough workers in the naval yards. Mm-hmm. So I think technology needs to be the other end of that really needs to be a focus. How do we optimize what we're doing? I think it's not unlike what the South Koreans have, where they've got high cost labor. So they've spent enormous amounts of time advancing their technological capabilities at their yards to make all the workflow as efficient as possible, do as much away from the water as possible. So I think we're going to have to lean in there even more. And we need to, encourage the next generation, certainly, to, be naval architects, if there was one thing globally that I heard from everyone, it was that we're woefully short on people in that area. I've been telling people ever since, hey, you want your kid to have a lifetime, job, gainful employment, send them to go be a naval architect.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay, so I think we're out there on time. I would like to thank everybody for participating today, and for our panelists. Kind of 2 thank yous: 1 for being wonderful panelists today, and 2 for the work you're doing. It is really important work to help us advance our maritime industrial base, and I appreciate it. So thank you all very much for participating today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.